James's heart pounded as he stepped into his wife Emily's family home, the familiar scent of lavender and fresh baking doing little to calm the unease gnawing at his chest. He had been dreading this visit ever since Emily's mother, Margaret, had announced she would stay for a week, and now, seeing her smile as she welcomed them, James felt the tension coil tighter inside him. Margaret's voice was sweet, her words polite, but there was something in the way she looked at him, a quiet scrutiny that made him feel exposed and judged. Every comment she made, even about trivial matters, seemed layered with subtle criticism, and James could sense Emily's mother testing him, probing for flaws, while Emily remained oblivious, her cheerful excitement blinding her to the strain he felt. He tried to warn Emily gently, saying, "I feel uncomfortable around her sometimes, Em. She makes me uneasy," but Emily laughed lightly, brushing his concern aside with a casual smile. "Mom's just protective, James. You're imagining things." "Relax," she said, her voice warm but dismissive, and though James wanted to insist, he stopped himself, swallowing the words, afraid to ruin the harmony that Emily clearly cherished. That night, as he lay awake beside her, James stared at the ceiling, replaying the moments of the day, each interaction with Margaret feeling heavier in memory. He remembered how she had lingered near him while pouring tea, her gaze resting a little too long on his face, how her questions about his career and routines carried a tone that was polite on the surface but edged with subtle challenge. He remembered Emily's bright smile, her laughter ringing in his ears, and a pang of longing mixed with frustration surged inside him. He loved Emily, more than anything, and he wanted her to trust his feelings, to understand that he was not imagining the tension he felt, yet he also feared that speaking too forcefully would make him seem overreacting, unreasonable, or ungrateful for her mother's visit. Sleep was uneasy, filled with half-formed thoughts and restless tossing, as James considered the delicate balance he had to maintain, between honesty and peace, between protecting his own emotional space and honoring Emily's love for her mother. He remembered the small gestures of Margaret throughout the day, how she rearranged some of the furniture subtly, commenting on how it would make the house more welcoming, yet James felt it was an intrusion, a subtle assertion of control. He thought of how she had hovered in the kitchen while he helped Emily with dinner, making quiet, approving noises when Emily's suggestions pleased her, but frowning slightly whenever James offered input. James knew he could be misreading things, but there was an edge to her attention that felt uncomfortable, like walking on a tightrope under her watchful gaze. Emily, absorbed in conversation and laughter, seemed unaware, radiating trust and warmth toward both him and her mother, which made James's isolation even sharper. He longed to confide, to have Emily acknowledge his unease, but each attempt during the day had been gently dismissed, leaving him frustrated and increasingly silent. Yet, beneath the anxiety, there was a persistent tenderness. He loved Emily's smile, her soft voice, the little gestures she made that reminded him why he had fallen in love with her. As the evening wore on, he found himself retreating to the study, hoping for a moment of quiet reflection, only to be haunted by the subtle ways Margaret had inserted herself into every interaction. He remembered her complimenting Emily on the way she had taught him so well, a remark that felt innocent but carried an uncomfortable weight, suggesting that he was under scrutiny, that his flaws were being quietly catalogued. James's mind raced with conflicting emotions, love for his wife, irritation and discomfort with her mother, and the fear that Emily would never see the tension he felt unless it escalated into something unavoidable. He thought about the future days of her visit, wondering if he could maintain composure, if he could navigate polite conversation while protecting his emotional space, if he could keep Emily's trust while also asserting his own feelings. He realized that this visit was more than a simple family stay, it was a test of patience, love, and understanding. That night, sleep finally took him, but not before a subtle vibration on his phone startled him, a message that appeared from an unknown number, brief and cryptic: "Watch closely. Not everything is as it seems." James stared at the screen, heart racing, mind spinning, unsure if it was coincidence or a warning, and he lay awake for hours, thinking about Margaret, about Emily, about the tension that seemed to stretch invisibly through the walls of the house. The unease wrapped around him like a shadow, but beneath it, there was a glimmer of hope, hope that his love for Emily, and hers for him, could weather the subtle storms of interference, misunderstanding, and unspoken conflict. And as the first light of morning crept through the curtains, James knew that the real challenge of understanding, trust, and emotional connection had only just begun, and that he would have to navigate the days ahead with courage, honesty, and a careful heart, all while longing for Emily's recognition of his truth and praying that love could bridge the invisible gap growing between them. Days passed, and the tension in James's chest grew heavier with each interaction, the warmth he once felt in Emily's home slowly replaced by unease and quiet dread, as Margaret's presence seemed to linger everywhere, subtle yet unrelenting, like a shadow James could not escape, and though Emily remained cheerful and oblivious, laughing with her mother in ways that made him ache with both love and frustration, James felt increasingly isolated in his own home, noticing the small patterns that seemed designed to unsettle him, Margaret questioning his choices with seemingly innocent curiosity, asking about his work, his habits, the way he spent time with Emily, each inquiry polite but with an edge that made him second-guess himself, while Emily's gentle dismissals left him feeling invisible, her soft words of reassurance a balm that never quite reached the underlying tension, leaving him trapped in a maze of silent conflict where love and fear intertwined, and every evening, James would find himself craving Emily's attention more than ever, longing for her to see the truth he could not force her to believe, longing for a simple acknowledgement that he felt controlled and scrutinized in ways she had yet to understand, and the couple's once joyous dinners became tense affairs, filled with careful words and guarded smiles, as James navigated the subtle minefield of Margaret's influence, never wanting to upset Emily but increasingly aware that his emotional boundaries were being tested, noticing how Margaret's laughter seemed to follow him in rooms, how her eyes seemed to study his reactions, how she would compliment Emily in ways that left James feeling diminished, small, even though he knew her intentions were complicated, perhaps protective in her own way but crossing lines he could not ignore, and one evening, after a day of polite conversation and hidden frustration, James watched quietly as Margaret lingered in the kitchen while he helped Emily prepare dinner, noticing the way she smiled at Emily's suggestions while barely nodding at his, the subtle differences gnawing at him, and when he tried to mention something to Emily, a minor irritation at a comment Margaret had made, she simply laughed, saying he was overthinking, brushing his words aside with the light touch of her hand, leaving James torn between love for her and the growing sense that his voice was not being heard, and the nights became longer, restless with thoughts of confrontation avoided, worries about how to set boundaries without upsetting the delicate balance of their marriage, while longing for moments alone with Emily that were slowly slipping away under the quiet pressure of her mother's constant presence, and the emotional strain grew heavier as James found himself thinking about every glance, every word, every subtle manipulation, and the small ways Margaret seemed to assert control, offering help that was really scrutiny, giving advice that felt like judgment, and observing his every move with eyes that were too sharp, yet Emily remained blind to the tension, speaking of her mother's kindness, recalling childhood memories with a fondness that made James's heart ache, wishing she could see the truth, wishing she could understand that love alone could not erase the discomfort he felt, and in the quiet moments before sleep, James would replay the day, analyzing every interaction, wondering if he was imagining things or if Margaret's presence was slowly eroding the intimacy and trust he had with Emily, and he noticed himself withdrawing slightly, smiling when needed, speaking when prompted, yet holding back the real thoughts that weighed him down, the frustration at not being believed, the longing for Emily's understanding, the fear that her mother's subtle control might create a permanent rift, and one evening, as they all sat in the living room after dinner, Margaret casually remarked on how James was still adjusting to their routines, her voice light but sharp, and Emily, laughing softly, glanced at him with a smile, saying, "See, James, you're fine. You're overthinking," and James felt a wave of helplessness, longing to tell her everything, yet fearing she would dismiss it as paranoia. And as he sat there, watching Emily's bright face and Margaret's sly, unreadable smile, he felt a bittersweet ache, knowing he loved his wife too much to risk conflict, yet also knowing that the distance between them was growing, invisible but undeniable, fed by silence, misunderstandings, and the subtle but constant intrusion of a presence he could neither ignore nor openly challenge. And late that night, after Emily had gone to bed and Margaret had retired to her room, James sat alone in the study, staring at the dim light, feeling a mix of exhaustion, longing, and love, thinking about how fragile the connection with Emily had become, how easily misunderstandings could turn into resentment, how deeply he wished she would see the situation from his eyes. And he realized that to protect their marriage, he needed courage, honesty, and patience. That he could not let fear or frustration drive a wedge between them, and yet, as he lay awake, replaying every subtle comment, every glance, every quiet interaction, he could not shake the feeling that something more was brewing, a hidden tension that would require confrontation sooner or later. And as the moonlight filtered through the curtains, James felt both the ache of distance and the warmth of love, knowing that the coming days would test his resilience, his emotional strength, and the depth of trust he shared with Emily. And he silently vowed to remain patient, to remain loving, and to find the right moment to make her understand, because he knew that without mutual understanding, the quiet invasion of their marriage could grow into something far more damaging. And he longed for the day when Emily would see clearly, when their love would be strengthened rather than tested, when the subtle pressures of outside influence would no longer shadow their hearts. And as he finally drifted toward uneasy sleep, James felt a small spark of hope, a reminder that love, patience, and honesty might still overcome the subtle tension and growing distance, if only he could find the courage to speak his truth at the right moment. James could feel the strain of the past week pressing heavily on him, a mix of frustration, longing, and helplessness that refused to fade, as every interaction with Margaret seemed carefully calculated to unsettle him, her polite smiles and subtle criticisms weaving a tension through the home that left him exhausted and craving Emily's understanding. And though he loved Emily more than anything, he found himself retreating inward, hesitant to voice the depth of his discomfort for fear of being dismissed. And yet, the more he stayed silent, the more the weight of Margaret's presence grew, like an invisible barrier between him and his wife. And every evening, he tried to create moments of intimacy, hoping Emily would notice the strain in his eyes, the way he flinched at her mother's comments, the way he hesitated before speaking. But Emily's cheerful warmth, oblivious to his internal turmoil, often made him feel both comforted and painfully unseen, like a shadow lingering behind her light. And one evening, after Margaret had left the kitchen following a particularly sharp remark disguised as concern over his career choices, James found himself alone with Emily in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp highlighting the tenderness in her features, and he wanted desperately to tell her everything, to make her understand the emotional intrusion he felt every day, the subtle ways Margaret undermined him while he tried to be polite, the growing fear that Emily might never truly see the tension that haunted him. Yet when he opened his mouth, the words stuck, as if fear and love tangled in his throat, and he settled for speaking about minor stress at work instead, hoping she would read between the lines. And Emily, sensing something but not fully understanding, took his hand gently, brushing back a stray lock of hair, her touch soft yet unknowing, her eyes filled with concern. And James felt a pang of longing, the desire to be fully seen and understood by the woman he loved more than life itself, a longing that mingled with frustration at the invisible weight of her mother's influence. And over the next few days, James noticed small cracks in his patience, moments when he flinched at Margaret's presence, caught himself biting his tongue before speaking, and found solace only in the fleeting private smiles exchanged with Emily, little moments of connection that reminded him why he loved her and why he needed her trust to survive this invisible storm. And late one night, after Emily had gone to bed, James lingered in the study, staring at the dim light reflecting on the wall, thinking of the delicate balance he needed to maintain, wanting to confront Margaret without causing a rift, wanting to protect Emily's feelings while also protecting his own emotional space. And in the silence, he realized how deeply the tension had affected him, how much he longed for validation, for Emily to acknowledge the unease he carried like a secret weight, a longing that had grown so strong it ached with every heartbeat, and he thought of all the subtle ways Margaret had intruded, the lingering comments about his habits, the sly smiles that seemed to judge his every move, the constant presence that overshadowed his life with Emily, all while she maintained the guise of maternal concern. And James understood that his struggle was not with Emily, whom he adored, but with a hidden force threatening the intimacy and trust that formed the foundation of their marriage, and he realized that to preserve the bond he cherished, he needed to speak, to find the courage to reveal his truth, even if it meant risking conflict, and he began planning how to approach Emily, how to make her see the subtle manipulations without creating resentment, knowing that honesty would be the only way to reclaim the closeness that was slowly slipping away. And yet, as he mapped the words in his mind, he felt the pull of longing, the ache for her presence, the desire for her to lean into him and reassure him that love could withstand interference, the desire for her to see the real him beyond the forced smiles and patient nods. And in that quiet reflection, James remembered the first moments of their love, the laughter, the whispered conversations, the comfort of knowing he had a partner who believed in him, and he realized he needed that belief now more than ever, to remind him that he was not alone in the struggle for emotional survival. And as he sat there, a faint message notification appeared on his phone, brief and mysterious, reading only, "Some truths are hidden. Watch closely." His heart raced, the words striking a chord that amplified both his fear and curiosity, and he knew that the next steps he took could change everything, that confrontation, clarity, and honesty were unavoidable, yet the timing had to be perfect to protect both Emily and the fragile connection they shared. And over the next few days, he watched, listened, and carefully chose his moments, seeking signs, reading interactions, weighing every smile and glance for hidden meanings, while the emotional tension tightened like a spring ready to snap, the longing for Emily's understanding growing with every passing hour, the frustration of unspoken truths gnawing at him, and in his quiet heart, he rehearsed conversations, imagining the tears, the apologies, the embraces, knowing that love could survive only if truth was finally spoken, if boundaries were drawn without destroying trust, if his emotions were validated and shared. And every night, he returned to the same spot in the study, staring at the dim light, feeling the ache of distance and the warmth of love, longing for her touch, her acknowledgement, her understanding, and imagining the moment when he could finally bridge the silent gap, when Emily would finally see not just his patience, but his pain, not just his love, but the strength it took to remain gentle under invisible pressure. And as he drifted toward uneasy sleep, James felt a flicker of hope amidst the tension, knowing that the next chapter of their relationship would require courage, honesty, and a willingness to confront hidden truths, and that through love, trust, and careful hearts, he and Emily could weather the storm together, restoring the intimacy that had been strained, and finding in each other the reassurance that love, when nurtured with patience and openness, could survive even the most subtle challenges, leaving James both anxious and determined for the days ahead, aware that his emotional journey was far from over but certain that the strength of their bond could carry them through if only he could finally make Emily understand the hidden pressures threatening their life together. The morning sunlight spilled through the curtains, warming the room, but James felt a heaviness in his chest as he held the cryptic message he had received the night before, the words "Some truths are hidden. Watch closely" echoing in his mind as he thought about Emily, about Margaret, and about the fragile balance of trust and love that had been tested over the past weeks. And he knew he could no longer remain silent, that the unspoken tension between them had reached a point where honesty was the only way forward, so he asked Emily to join him for a walk in the park, the crisp air filling their lungs, the quiet rustle of trees around them providing a safe space for the conversation that could change everything. And as they walked side by side, James began slowly, carefully, explaining the subtle but persistent ways Margaret had undermined him, how her polite questions and lingering glances had made him feel controlled and scrutinized, how her presence had cast an invisible shadow over their home and their relationship, and he spoke of the nights spent restless, longing for Emily's understanding, longing for her to see that his discomfort was real, that it was not overreaction or paranoia. And as he spoke, Emily's face shifted from confusion to shock, the realization hitting her that she had been blind to the tension, that her mother's actions, though meant to be caring, had affected the man she loved in ways she had not imagined, and tears welled in her eyes as she reached for his hand, holding it tightly, apologizing softly for not seeing sooner, for dismissing his feelings, for unknowingly allowing the imbalance to grow. And James felt a rush of relief and love, the ache of longing finally finding a balm in Emily's empathy, in her willingness to hear and truly understand. And as they continued walking, he shared the ways he had struggled to protect both his emotions and her feelings, the delicate balance he had tried to maintain, the silent moments of frustration and longing for closeness that had been interrupted by Margaret's subtle manipulations. And Emily listened intently, her voice breaking as she promised to set boundaries with her mother, to protect their marriage while still honoring the love she had for her mother. And James felt a warmth spread through him, a renewed sense of connection, the bond that had been stretched now feeling stronger because it was rooted in honesty and vulnerability. And he realized that love was more than passion or shared laughter, it was trust, patience, understanding, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths together. And as they paused by a quiet bench overlooking the pond, Emily rested her head on his shoulder, and he felt the weight of the past weeks lift slightly, replaced by a gentle intimacy that reminded him why he had fallen in love with her, why he had endured silent tension, why he had longed for this very moment of recognition and emotional closeness. And in that shared silence, surrounded by the soft whispers of nature, James knew that their relationship had survived a trial not of violence or betrayal, but of subtle interference and misunderstanding, a test of love's resilience and depth. And he thought about Margaret, who remained a part of their lives but now would have clearly defined boundaries, and he felt a cautious hope that with communication, patience, and mutual respect, the emotional strain could be managed, and he could once again feel fully present with Emily, free from invisible tension, able to express his love openly and without fear. And in that hope, he saw the reflection of their journey, the ache of longing, the pain of being unseen, the struggle to maintain patience, and ultimately, the triumph of love through honesty and understanding. And as the sun rose higher, painting the sky with soft golds and pinks, James and Emily walked hand in hand back toward home, hearts lighter, breaths deeper, and in every glance and gentle touch, they rediscovered the warmth of trust and the sweetness of intimacy that had been quietly overshadowed for weeks. And James realized that while challenges would come, while the subtle pressures of family and circumstance might return, the foundation they had rebuilt was stronger, a combination of love, truth, and patience. And he felt a quiet confidence that as long as they continued to speak, to listen, and to honor each other's feelings, nothing external could truly harm the bond they shared. And as they stepped through the front door together, the familiar scent of the home welcoming them, James looked at Emily and felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude, love, and relief, knowing that their marriage had survived a difficult chapter not through avoidance, not through silence, but through courage, honesty, and mutual care. And he held her hand tightly, cherishing every heartbeat, every glance, every smile, aware that the past weeks had tested them, stretched them, but ultimately brought them closer. And as they settled into the evening, sharing quiet conversation, laughter, and soft moments of connection, James understood the truth of love. It was not just the easy moments, but the struggles, the challenges, the unspoken fears faced together, the willingness to see each other fully and hold each other through uncertainty. And in that understanding, he felt the lasting warmth of intimacy, a love matured by trials, and a quiet joy in knowing that together, he and Emily could face the future, protect their hearts, and nurture the closeness that had been threatened but never broken. And as night fell, with the soft glow of lamps and the comfort of their shared presence, James finally let go of the lingering tension, resting in Emily's embrace, the sense of longing replaced by peace, love reaffirmed, and the knowledge that their connection was deeper, more resilient, and more tender than ever before.